Michael was a young man whom everyone in the neighborhood knew, and not because of anything extraordinary, but because of the simple and genuine way he treated people. Since he was little, he had always shown a kind heart, helping his neighbors and friends with any task, no matter how insignificant it might seem. He was the type who would stop to help a lady carry her groceries, who would offer to mow the lawn for the older neighbor, or simply listen attentively to anyone needing to vent. His presence brought a kind of comfort to everyone around him, and that made Michael a special person, even if he didn't realize it. Michael's life seemed to follow a calm and predictable rhythm, like the seasons of the year that changed smoothly. But just like in all stories, this tranquility was about to be interrupted, like a gentle breeze that precedes a storm. And it was on an ordinary day, while Michael was fixing a fence at a friend's house, that the unexpected knocked at his door, literally. There, at the threshold of his modest home, stood Mrs. Johnson, a neighbor he recognized by sight, but with whom he had never exchanged more than casual greetings. Her look was anxious, as if she carried an invisible weight pushing her forward. Michael, always willing to help, felt a tightness in his chest upon seeing Mrs. Johnson's expression. He knew that something important was about to happen, something that would somehow test the kindness that had always been his hallmark. And so, without hesitation, he prepared to open the door of his heart once again, not realizing that by doing so, he would also be opening the door to a series of events that would change his life forever. What could Mrs. Johnson be asking for? How would this affect Michael and his reputation in the community he loved so much? The answers to these questions were about to be revealed one by one, like pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know he was assembling. Mrs. Johnson, with her hunched posture and hesitant steps, seemed to carry more than just age. Michael, seeing her worried face, knew that something was wrong. She wasn't the type to ask for help easily. She had always been an independent woman, proud of taking care of herself and the small house she had lived in for decades. When she finally spoke, her voice came out low, almost like a whisper. "Michael, I need some help. The kitchen pipe has a terrible leak, and I can't fix it on my own." Michael didn't think twice. He knew that Mrs. Johnson wouldn't ask for help if she weren't truly in need. With an encouraging smile, he grabbed his toolbox and followed her to her house, feeling that, somehow, this simple act of kindness could be more significant than it seemed. Upon arriving, the scene he found was of an old kitchen, marked by time, where each object seemed to tell a story. The sound of dripping was constant, almost like a clock marking the slow passage of minutes. Michael knelt on the cold floor and began to work on the pipe. He was not just fixing a leak, but also trying to ease the weight he saw in Mrs. Johnson's eyes. As he worked, she stood by silently, as if that moment represented more than just solving a household problem. It was as if, at that instant, she entrusted Michael with a confidence that went beyond the task at hand. A confidence that he was the right person at the right time to bring a little peace to her life. Michael, in turn, couldn't help but think about how small gestures of help could mean so much to someone. And so, with each turn of the screwdriver, he felt he was building something deeper, a connection, a bond of trust that was not undone by the water flowing down the drain. And as the dripping diminished, almost disappearing, Michael realized that often the greatest problems in life begin with small drops. And it was with this thought that he finished the job, unaware that by fixing that leak, he was paving the way for a chain of events that would test his kindness in ways he had never anticipated. Michael, with his natural ability to help others, didn't take long to identify the problem. The pipe was corroded by time, like so many other things in that house that carried decades of stories. He knew this wasn't just a simple fix. For Mrs. Johnson, it was a cry for help. He dedicated himself to the work with attention and care, as if he were dealing with something much more precious than a pipe under the sink. As he adjusted the pieces and tightened the screws, Mrs. Johnson watched him, now with a somewhat calmer expression. It was as if, with every movement of his hands, Michael was not only repairing the plumbing, but also stitching pieces of hope into that woman's heart. Time seemed to pass slowly in that small space, filled only by the sound of tools and Mrs. Johnson's gentle breathing, who, for a moment, seemed to forget all her worries. When Michael finally stood up, wiping the sweat from his forehead, he saw in her eyes something more than gratitude. It was a deep relief, as if she knew that with Michael there, things could somehow work out. When he finished, Michael said goodbye, politely refusing any kind of payment or reward. For him, the greatest payment was knowing that Mrs. Johnson could sleep peacefully that night, without the annoying sound of dripping to disturb her. But, like all good deeds, this one also carried something unexpected, something Michael could never foresee. And as he walked back home, satisfied with his day's work, life was preparing yet another of its surprises. One that would test not only his kindness, but also the trust he had always had in the people around him. What Michael didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would be the beginning of a chain of events that would forever change his life and the community's perception of him. How would he face what was to come? Only time would tell. The next morning, the sun had barely started to light the streets when Michael was surprised by firm knocks on the door. He opened it, expecting to find a neighbor or someone seeking help, but was met with something that made him stop in his tracks. In front of him stood two police officers with serious expressions, and beside them, Mrs. Johnson, her face marked by worry. Before Michael could say anything, one of the officers spoke. "Sir, we need you to come with us. There is a serious accusation against you." Michael felt a chill run down his spine, not understanding what was happening. Mrs. Johnson reported that after you fixed the leak in her house, her wallet went missing. Those words hit Michael like an unexpected blow. He looked at Mrs. Johnson, hoping she would deny it, that she would say it was a misunderstanding. But her gaze was fixed on the ground, avoiding his. Michael felt a knot form in his throat. How could someone think that he, who was always ready to help, could be capable of something so vile? He tried to explain, but his words came out shaky, cut off by the disbelief of the moment. I just went to help. I fixed the pipe and left. I would never." The officers, however, were just following protocol, and even though one of them had a look of slight doubt, the procedure had to be followed. As they led him outside, Michael felt the eyes of neighbors beginning to appear in the windows. Murmurs spread quickly, and he, who had always been seen as a pillar of kindness in the community, was now being judged before he could even defend himself. The heavy silence that fell over him as he was taken away was not just from the surrounding environment, but also within himself. Michael knew he was about to face a trial that would require more than his kindness. It would demand a strength he didn't even know if he possessed. And as he looked back toward his house, he wondered, how could he prove his innocence when those who should trust him now looked at him with suspicion? That doubt began to spread, like a shadow creeping into the corners of the community, and what would come next would challenge not only the truth, but also the faith Michael had in himself and the people around him. Inside the small police station, time seemed to drag on. Michael, sitting in an uncomfortable chair, could hardly believe what was happening. All he had done was try to help, and now he was there, accused of a crime he never committed. The accusation of theft weighed on him like a burden he didn't know how to carry. The police officers, following protocol, conducted a search of his house. Every corner, every drawer, everything was rummaged through in search of the missing wallet. Michael watched them in silence, his heart heavy, trying to understand how his life had changed so drastically in such a short time. As they searched his home, Michael's mind was in turmoil. He thought of every moment he had spent at Mrs. Johnson's house, reliving the minutes that now seemed laden with a meaning he couldn't decipher. But no matter how hard he tried, there was nothing that could point to him having made any mistake. The search, however, ended without results. There was no sign of Mrs. Johnson's wallet anywhere in Michael's home. This should have been a relief, but instead, it only heightened the tension. What did that mean? If it wasn't with him, then where was it? The police officers, visibly dissatisfied with not having found anything, exchanged glances, unsure of what to do next. Mrs. Johnson, waiting outside, maintained the same worried expression, as if she couldn't accept that the truth was still out of reach. The community, which had always seen Michael as a model of kindness, was now divided. Some, still confident in his character, believed it was all just a big misunderstanding. Others, however, began to doubt, allowing the seed of suspicion to grow slowly. Michael felt the weight of that division, like a crack opening up between him and the people he had always considered friends and neighbors. How could he prove his innocence when the evidence was as elusive as the truth itself? As night fell, uncertainty loomed over everyone like a heavy cloud. Michael knew that this story was far from over, and that somehow he would need to find a way to uncover what really happened. Because deep down, he felt that the truth was there, hidden somewhere, waiting to be revealed, and he was determined to find it, no matter the cost. As Michael tried to process everything that had happened, the news of the accusation spread through the community like wildfire. It didn't take long for people to start talking. In small groups at the bakery, in line at the grocery store, and even in the town square, where everyone used to gather on weekends, Michael's name was on everyone's lips. Some refused to believe it. For them, Michael was the same kind-hearted young man he had always been, incapable of hurting a fly. This is a mistake, a misunderstanding, they said, trying to keep alive the image of the young man who had always been willing to help. But, as often happens in situations like this, doubt is a shadow that grows quickly. Others, however, began to question. What if he wasn't so perfect after all? What if behind that smile there was something more? The questions, initially whispered, began to gain volume, and soon there were those who looked at Michael differently. The same man who had once been greeted with smiles and handshakes was now met with suspicious glances and murmurs that fell silent when he passed by. Michael felt the weight of those glances, as if each person who doubted his innocence was adding another brick to the wall that now seemed to separate him from the rest of the community. Those who still believed in him tried to comfort him, but the division was already made. Suspicion, even if unfounded, has a cruel way of poisoning relationships. Mrs. Johnson, for her part, appeared increasingly tormented. She had made the accusation, and now she saw the division it caused. But deep down, she too began to question herself. Could it really be possible that that young man, who had always been so helpful, had done something so low? The doubts she herself nurtured left her unsettled, but it was too late to backtrack. And Michael, amidst all this, tried to hold his head high. He knew the truth was somewhere out there, but the more time passed, the more it seemed to hide away. He couldn't let the doubts of others bring him down, but how could he stay strong when the very ground beneath his feet seemed to be disintegrating? As the days went by and the tension only increased, the community that had once been united was now fragmented. What had once been a certainty transformed into doubt, and Michael, who had always been the person everyone could trust, now found himself fighting to prove something he had always believed to be evident: his own innocence. But this struggle was just beginning, and Michael knew that to restore his reputation, he would need more than words. He would need something that could dispel the clouds of suspicion and bring back the light of truth. But where to find that proof, and how to convince everyone that, despite everything, he was still the same Michael as before? The weight of the accusation began to manifest in ways Michael could never have imagined. With each passing day, he felt the distrust growing around him, like a shadow that wouldn't leave him in peace. What was once a simple and quiet life was now filled with hard stares and uncomfortable silences. Isolation became his constant companion, and the feeling of injustice a heavy burden to bear. He had always been someone who cared about what others thought, not out of vanity, but from a genuine desire to do good and be helpful. Now, however, that desire had turned into pain, as the same people he had helped so much now regarded him with suspicion. Michael's easy smile became rare, and his walks through the streets he once loved were replaced by shorter, more discreet routes, away from the warm greetings he used to receive. The feeling of injustice weighed on his shoulders like a load he couldn't simply drop. He wondered how something so simple, so routine as helping Mrs. Johnson had turned into a nightmare that threatened to destroy him. The sadness in his heart was deep, but stronger still was the determination to prove his innocence, even as the truth seemed further away. The nights, which once brought rest, were now moments of torment, where doubts and the fear of never clearing his name haunted him. He relived every second of the day he helped Mrs. Johnson, searching for any detail that might have gone unnoticed, something that could prove it was all a mistake. As Michael struggled to maintain his sanity amidst the whirlwind of distrust, he realized something even more painful: isolation. People who had once been close began to drift away. Neighbors who used to exchange friendly words with him, now crossed the street to avoid him. Michael was becoming a stranger in his own community, a place he had always called home. The pain of being unjustly accused was not just a wound in his heart, but a scar being marked on his soul. And with every suspicious glance, with every whisper he heard as he passed by, the scar deepened, reminding him that the truth, no matter how powerful, was not something easily reached. He knew that to restore his life, he would need much more than just words. He would need undeniable proof, something that could undo all the misunderstanding. But where to find this proof, and how to make it speak louder than the silent judgment of the community? These questions echoed in Michael's mind, like a challenge he needed to face, even as hope seemed further away. The road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but Michael knew that giving up was not an option. The truth had to prevail, and he was determined to find it, no matter how difficult the journey. As Michael sank into the darkness of doubt and loneliness, there was an unexpected light about to emerge from where he least expected it. His younger brother, Ethan, an intelligent and curious boy, had always admired Michael for his kindness and willingness to help. And it was this admiration that made Ethan refuse to believe any of the accusations now hanging over his brother. Ethan, though young, understood the gravity of the situation. He saw the suffering in Michael's eyes and felt a deep need to do something, anything, to help. He spent hours online, researching, trying to find any clue that could prove his brother's innocence. And then, on one of those nights of tireless searching, he stumbled upon something that made his heart race. It was a video, accidentally recorded, where a group of young people was gathered on a corner. The quality of the footage was poor, the audio distorted, but what caught Ethan's attention was the face of one of the boys. It was Ryan, a known troublemaker in the neighborhood, someone always getting into trouble. And as the camera captured them laughing and chatting, Ryan's words echoed in Ethan's mind like a revelation. In the video, Ryan boasted about something he had done recently. Amid laughs and mocking comments, he mentioned having gotten something from an elderly lady, something that seemed too easy to be true. The exact words got muddled in the background noise, but enough for Ethan to understand what was implied. Ryan was talking about Mrs. Johnson's wallet. Ethan's heart raced as he replayed the video several times, making sure what he heard was real. This could be the key to freeing Michael from the nightmare he had been thrown into. Without wasting a moment, Ethan ran to Michael's room, holding the phone with the video as if it were a treasure. Michael, tired and disheartened, saw the excitement on his brother's face, and for a moment felt a pang of hope. As he watched the video, disbelief and relief mixed within him. Finally, proof. Something tangible that could turn the tide in his favor. It was as if, at that moment, a door opened, offering an escape from all the anguish he had been facing. But one question remained: how to use this proof to clear his name, and more importantly, how to ensure that the truth finally came to light. Michael knew the path wouldn't be easy, but now, for the first time in days, he had something that could give him a chance. And with Ethan's support, he felt he was no longer fighting alone. Together, they were about to face a new challenge, but this time, with renewed hope that justice would prevail. As the community remained divided, the truth began to reveal itself, slowly, like the first ray of sunshine after a long night. And Michael, now with the proof in hand, was determined to fight to the end to restore his honor and show everyone who he truly was. With the video in hand, Michael felt a wave of renewed determination. This was more than just evidence. It was a chance to reclaim his life, to show everyone that he had always been the same Michael they could trust. But he knew that having the video wasn't enough. He needed to present it in a way that left no room for doubt. Ethan, always by his side, urged him to act quickly. "Let's go to the police station now," said his brother, his voice full of urgency. Michael agreed, knowing that every minute counted. They ran through the streets, the cold morning wind barely felt amid the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Upon arriving at the station, Michael felt a mix of anxiety and hope. He knew this was his best chance, but he also feared that somehow it wouldn't be enough. The officer who attended them recognized Michael immediately, recalling the recent accusation. There was a certain skepticism in his gaze, as if he were waiting for yet another frustrated attempt to defend himself. But when Ethan pulled out the phone and showed the video, the atmosphere in the room changed. The officer watched the clip attentively, his expression slowly transforming from skepticism to surprise. "This changes everything," he murmured before calling the detective. The video was watched again, this time by more experienced eyes, which immediately grasped the gravity of the revelation. The sound of Ryan's words, even distorted, was clear enough to understand that he was bragging about something he shouldn't have done. The detective, with a serious expression, looked at Michael and Ethan. "We're going to act immediately," he said, rising from his seat. And so, as Michael watched, the machinery of justice began to move. The investigation, which until then had seemed stalled, gained new momentum. Now, it was no longer about a young man trying to defend himself, but about uncovering the truth and bringing to light what really happened. As the hours passed and the officers followed new leads based on the video, Michael and Ethan stayed at the station, waiting for news. The weight Michael felt on his shoulders began to lift, replaced by a sense of relief he could barely dare to believe. The truth was there, about to be revealed, and justice was finally beginning to manifest. However, Michael knew that even with this evidence, the road to restoring his reputation would still be long. But at that moment, the most important thing was that the first major victory was within reach. He looked at Ethan, feeling a deep gratitude for his brother, whose determination and faith in his innocence had been the beacon in the darkness. Now, it remained to be seen how the community would react when the truth came to light, and how he, Michael, would handle what was to come. The wait at the station felt endless, but hope was now a living flame in his heart. Justice was on its way, and with it, the chance for Michael to be who he had always been, a kind-hearted young man, free from the shadows of the unjust accusation that had nearly destroyed his life. The hours dragged on, and each minute felt like an eternity for Michael and Ethan as they waited in the station. The video Ethan had found had ignited a spark of hope, but now everything depended on the investigation. Then, finally, the door to the room opened, and the detective entered with a serious expression, but with a glimmer in his eye that suggested something significant had occurred. "Michael, we have good news," the detective began, placing the video on the table. Thanks to this recording, we were able to locate Ryan and confront him. Faced with the evidence, he ended up confessing. He admitted to stealing Mrs. Johnson's wallet that day, and worse still, said he thought he could get away with blaming you. The detective's words fell like a weight that, instead of crushing him, relieved him. Michael felt such deep relief that he had to hold on to the chair to keep from breaking down with emotion. The nightmare that had begun with a simple visit to help was finally coming to an end. He no longer needed to prove anything. The truth was exposed, clear as day. But as the news brought relief, it also came with a silent sadness. Michael realized how much this experience had changed him. The trust he had always had in the goodness of people now carried a caution that hadn't existed before. Still, he knew he needed to stand up and move forward, rebuild the bridges that had been shaken, and somehow overcome this difficult phase. The detective continued, "We will now officially clear your name. We have spoken with Mrs. Johnson, and she is deeply remorseful. She understands that she made a mistake in accusing you and wants to meet with you in person to apologize." Michael nodded, but he knew that as important as the apology was, the scars from this experience would take time to heal. The feeling of having been judged and condemned without evidence was something he wouldn't forget anytime soon. But now, at least, he had the chance to start rebuilding his life. As the detective spoke about the next steps, about how the police would communicate with the community and ensure that everyone knew of Michael's innocence, he felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was the relief of finally seeing justice done, but on the other, there was the reality that even with his name cleared, not everyone would forget so easily what had happened. Still, Michael decided at that moment that he would not let this experience define who he was. He had always been, and would always be, that kind-hearted young man who helped others, and he would not allow an injustice to change that. As he left the station, with Ethan by his side, he knew he had much work to do to restore his life and reputation. But now, with the truth on his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. And so, as the sun set, Michael felt that, despite everything, the next day would bring a new beginning. He knew the road would be long, but with the support of Ethan and those who believed in him, he was determined to move forward, stronger and wiser than ever. The news of Michael's innocence spread quickly through the community, just as the accusation had spread before. But this time, the conversations carried a different tone, no longer one of distrust, but of surprise and, for many, shame. Mrs. Johnson, who had previously made the wrong accusation, felt the weight of what she had done. She knew that her words had unleashed a storm in Michael's life, a storm he did not deserve to face. Determined to correct her mistake, she decided to seek him out. It wasn't easy for her to make that decision. Pride and guilt battled in her heart, but the truth was as clear as day, and she knew she needed to face the consequences of her actions. The walk to Michael's house felt longer than ever, each step heavy with the burden of guilt. When Michael opened the door and saw Mrs. Johnson, the silence between them was profound. No words were spoken in the first moments, only glances that carried more than 1,000 phrases could express. Finally, Mrs. Johnson, her voice trembling, broke the silence. Michael, I made a terrible mistake. I was hasty. I judged you without evidence, and I ended up causing great suffering. I am so sorry. I don't know if I can be forgiven, but I needed to come here and say that I truly regret it. Michael looked at the woman in front of him, the one who, just a few days earlier, was the reason for his pain, but paradoxically, was also someone he had always wanted to help. He saw, in her eyes, genuine remorse. And though the wound was still open, he knew that forgiveness was an important step toward his own healing. I understand, Mrs. Johnson, Michael replied, his voice calm but filled with emotion. These past few days have been difficult, but we all can make mistakes. I accept your apology. I think, in the end, all of this teaches us something about how we should trust and support one another. Mrs. Johnson, surprised and relieved by Michael's response, felt tears rolling down her face. It was not just the relief of being forgiven, but also the understanding that Michael's kindness was so deep that not even an injustice like that could destroy it. And in that moment, she decided she would do something more to make amends for the harm caused. Michael, I want to do something for you, she said, wiping her tears. I don't know if this can truly repair what happened, but I thought about creating a scholarship fund in your name. Something that can help other young people like you achieve their dreams without having to go through something like this. It would be a way to turn this painful experience into something positive. Michael, taken by surprise, felt a mix of gratitude and humility. He never expected anything in return for his actions, and Mrs. Johnson's proposal was more than he could imagine. But at the same time, he saw it as an opportunity to transform pain into hope, not just for himself, but for others who could benefit from this gesture. With a nod, he accepted, not for himself, but for all those who could be touched by this initiative. And so, what began as an injustice transformed into a chance for something good, a way to show that even in the darkest situations, there is a light that can guide the way back to kindness and trust. Mrs. Johnson left Michael's house with a lighter heart, knowing that, despite everything, kindness still prevailed. And Michael, for his part, felt that with this new chapter, he could finally begin to rebuild his life, with the certainty that even in the most difficult moments, truth and compassion would always find a way to triumph. With the truth finally revealed, and Mrs. Johnson's gesture still fresh in everyone's mind, the community began to recover. But the impact of what had happened to Michael did not disappear so easily. The wounds of distrust, both for him and for those around him, needed time to heal. And it was in this healing process that something extraordinary began to happen. People who had once been divided between believing or not in Michael's innocence started to reflect on their own actions. They realized that in moments of doubt, they had allowed fear and suspicion to take the place of reason and empathy. And now, they felt the need to correct that. One by one, neighbors began to seek out Michael. Some approached him on the street. Others knocked on his door, and each encounter was marked by a sincere apology. Men and women, some with tears in their eyes, admitted they had been quick to judge, that they had allowed gossip and rumors to cloud their vision. They came not only to ask for forgiveness, but to reaffirm what Michael had always been to the community, a symbol of kindness and generosity. Slowly, the ice that had formed around Michael began to melt. He received each apology with the same serenity and understanding with which he had forgiven Mrs. Johnson. Not because it was easy, but because he knew that holding on to resentment would only prolong the suffering, and he was determined not to let distrust destroy the relationships he valued so much. And so, the community, which had once been fragmented, began to come together again. Michael's name, which had been tarnished by doubt, was now celebrated for the truth that had come to light. His story became a living lesson about the importance of believing in the best of people, even when circumstances seemed to suggest otherwise. One day, during a spontaneous gathering in the town square, where all the neighbors met for a picnic, Michael was surprised by a gesture he never expected. People began to stand up, one by one, sharing stories about how Michael had impacted their lives with his kindness. Each account was another brick in the rebuilding of mutual trust. And Michael, with a full heart, realized that this moment was more than just a simple gathering. It was proof that despite everything, kindness had prevailed. From that day on, the community decided to institute a monthly meeting, a gathering where everyone could connect, share their stories, and support one another. And at each of these meetings, the scholarship fund created by Mrs. Johnson in Michael's name was remembered, an initiative that expanded and began to transform the lives of many young people. Michael, though humble, knew that something profound had changed. He was no longer just the kind young man everyone knew. Now, he was a symbol of resilience, of how truth and forgiveness could not only heal wounds, but also unite a community in a way even stronger than before. And as life returned to normal, Michael knew that while challenges were inevitable, he had something that no one could take away: the certainty that in the end, good would always prevail. And this certainty, more than anything else, would guide his steps from then on. Over time, the community not only rebuilt itself, but flourished in ways no one could have predicted. The scholarship fund in Michael's name became more than a gesture of reparation. It transformed into an open door for the future of many young people who, like him, had the desire to make a difference in the world. The impact was immediate. Young people who once saw their dreams limited by financial circumstances now had a new opportunity to study, to grow, and to give back to the community that supported them. And every time a new scholarship was awarded, Michael's name was remembered with respect and admiration. Not only for what he had endured, but for what he symbolized: resilience, generosity, and the quiet strength of someone who always chose the path of good. Michael, in turn, continued to live simply, but now with a renewed purpose. He dedicated himself even more to his studies, inspired by the opportunities the scholarship fund offered. He knew that by doing so, he was honoring not only himself, but also the trust that the community had placed in him. The day he received the news that he had been accepted into a prestigious university was one of the most exciting of his life. It was not just the achievement of a dream, but the confirmation that all the effort, all the struggle to clear his name had been worth it. And as he shared this news with the community, Michael realized how much he was loved and supported by everyone around him. Mrs. Johnson, who had been the initial cause of all the turmoil, was among the first to congratulate him. Her face, now marked by serenity, reflected how much she had also changed. For her, seeing Michael move forward in life was a form of redemption, a way to correct the mistakes of the past through the success of that young man she had wronged. And together, they found a new form of friendship, built on the solid foundation of forgiveness and mutual understanding. As the months went by, and Michael prepared to head off to university, the community gathered once again, this time for a farewell party. The air was filled with pride and joy, as everyone knew they were sending one of their own to conquer the world. In the speech he gave that night, Michael, with a trembling voice, thanked everyone for their unconditional support. He spoke about how the difficulties he faced shaped him, about how, despite everything, he never lost faith in people and their essential goodness. And more than anything, he expressed his gratitude for being part of a community that, even after a great trial, chose unity and love above all. As he spoke, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Michael's journey was, in a way, the journey of everyone there, a reminder that even in the most difficult moments, it is possible to find the strength to move forward, and that by doing so, one can inspire others to do the same. And so, when Michael finally left for university, he was not just following a new path. He was carrying with him the dreams, hopes, and faith of an entire community. And this responsibility, far from being a burden, was for him an honor, a constant reminder that no matter where he was, he would always have a place to call home. His time at university was a new phase for Michael, full of discoveries and challenges, but also of personal growth. He dedicated himself to his studies with the same determination he had shown in every difficult moment of his life. But as he progressed in his education, something within him began to bloom, a desire to give back in an even greater way, to use everything he was learning to make a difference, not just for himself, but for all those who supported him. It was during a class on ethics and social justice that Michael had an epiphany. The lessons he was learning, combined with his own life experience, began to form a clear vision of how he could transform his future into something more than just a successful career. He wanted to become a voice for those who, like him, had faced injustices and use his knowledge to prevent others from going through what he had endured. With this new mission in mind, Michael began to engage in projects and initiatives within the university, focused on social justice and human rights. He became a leader, not by title, but through the genuine passion to help others. Peers and professors quickly noticed his dedication and integrity, and he began to gain recognition not only for his academic skills, but for his ability to inspire and unite people around a common cause. But even with all these new responsibilities, Michael never forgot his roots. During every class break, he returned to his community, to the place that had always supported him. And each return was a celebration, a moment of reconnection with those he considered his true family. He shared his achievements and challenges, always humble, always reminding everyone that his success was, in fact, a reflection of the unwavering support he had received. It was during one of these visits that Michael had a deep conversation with Mrs. Johnson, now a close friend. They reflected on everything that had happened, on how such a difficult situation had transformed into something that brought positive changes to so many lives. Mrs. Johnson, looking at Michael with pride, said, "You turned what could have been a burden into a blessing for all of us." These words stayed with Michael, like a beacon guiding him in every decision he made. He knew that no matter how far he went or how high he reached, he would always have a duty to his community, a duty to give back, to use his skills and opportunities to open doors for others. And so, at the end of his university education, Michael began to plan his next steps. But unlike many classmates focused on lucrative careers or glamorous destinations, Michael had a nobler goal in mind. He wanted to return home, not just as the young man who had left in search of an education, but as a man who had found his purpose, a purpose that was intrinsically linked to the people who formed him, to the community that never gave up on him. Throughout this journey, Michael realized that true fulfillment was not just in personal success, but in how that success could be used to improve the lives of others. And so, with every step he took, he moved closer, not only to a bright future, but to a future he wanted to share with all who had been part of his story. And when he finally decided it was time to return, he knew he was not just going back to his community. He was bringing with him everything he had learned, all the experiences that shaped him, and an unwavering desire to build something that truly made a difference for everyone. When Michael finally returned to his community, he did so with a heart full of gratitude and a mind brimming with plans. He was no longer the young man who had left in search of an education, but a man shaped by experiences that led him to understand the true meaning of leadership, service, and, above all, purpose. His arrival was met with a warm reception, but for him, this return was more than a celebration. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Michael's first steps were discreet. He spent some time reconnecting with the people who had been part of his journey from the beginning. He had long conversations with his old neighbors, revisited the places that marked his childhood and youth, and, more than anything, he listened. He listened to the stories, the challenges, and the hopes of those who still believed in the power of a united community. It was during one of those conversations that Michael had an idea that would change the life of the community forever. He realized that to truly impact people's lives, he needed to create something lasting, something that transcended his own story and continued to benefit future generations. And so, he decided to found a community center, a place where education, culture, and social support would come together to form a solid foundation for all. The community center, which quickly came to life, was named Center of Hope and Future, a name that reflected both Michael's journey and the vision he had for his community. With a scholarship fund as an integral part of the center, young people from all over the region began to access opportunities that had previously seemed unattainable. But it wasn't just about formal education. The center became a meeting point, a place where skills were developed, where local culture was celebrated, and where the community grew stronger. With each event, Each class taught, each project carried out, Michael saw the fruits of the work he and many others had planted together. He was no longer just giving back what he had received. He was creating something that would transcend his own existence. And this realization, more than any academic success or professional recognition, was what filled him with pride the most. Time passed, and the center of hope and future became a symbol of resilience, unity, and progress. People from neighboring communities came to see what was being done there, to learn and take back the lessons they could apply in their own homes. And Michael's story, which began with an unjust accusation and a fight for truth, was now told as an inspiring legend, a living proof that, with determination and kindness, even the most difficult challenges can be transformed into opportunities. But for Michael, the true victory was not in the great achievements or the many lives touched by the community center. The true victory was in the peace he found within himself, realizing that, in every moment of his journey, he chose the path of kindness, forgiveness, and service to others. And so, surrounded by those he helped to thrive, Michael grew old with the certainty that he had fulfilled his purpose. He knew that, even when the time came to step away from daily activities, the legacy he built would continue to grow, sustained by the hands of a community that, thanks to him, learned to believe again in the power of the collective. In the last years of his life, Michael did not need to make grand speeches or perform great actions. He simply lived with the tranquility of someone who knows they did their best, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. And as he looked to the future, he saw a bright horizon, not just for him, but for all those who, directly or indirectly, were touched by his story. Because, in the end, what Michael left was not just a community center, but an eternal lesson that the true power of a life well lived lies in how it transforms the world for the better, one small gesture at a time.